Morning. Hello. Hi. So we're going to be talking about sex. Um, so when we were growing up, there was this really hot song that used to go, "Let's talk about sex, baby. Let's talk about." So listen, when I decided that I was going to have a lightning talk around sex and sexuality, I think what motivated is that in public spaces, private spaces, we never really do have an honest conversation about sex, especially in Africa, and especially when you look at the way the media has evolved. Um, you sit down and you watch television with your children. Some years ago, we used to watch Tom and Jerry, and Tom and Jerry would be chasing each other. It was just about cat and mouse. But if you watch it now, Tom's gonna get distracted by a she-cat, right? And then my kids, I have teenage kids who watch Hey Jessie, and there's a kid on there that has this perpetual crush on the babysitter. So more often than not, you find that television is becoming the best sex education platform for our children. And yet we still want to have conversation about sex with so much conservatism as Africans. And this is unfortunate because what it simply reflects is that it's a conversation that is still bound or, determined by our cultural norms, issues around decency, obscenity, and you see a lot of the sexual content being regulated. People will actually go out of their way to have a law that regulates sex, viewing of sex, sharing of sex, and these are issues that we need to deal with because you're going to have a pop-up on your mobile phone, on your television, with or without your consent, that is sexual, right? So what is our challenge now is like when you look at the statistics in Africa, the majority of our African countries recognize heterosexual relationships. And you find that we have like 33 countries out of the 54 that actually do criminalize same-sex relationships. But there's so many paradoxes around this as well because the contradictions are, for instance, if you look in South Africa, the laws here do recognize same-sex marriages. And we're just across the border. So I grew up in Zimbabwe, and there's a big thing about sending your children to a South African university. And so you have shielded or protected your child, protected in quotes, around diversity of sexual relationships, and suddenly you throw them in a university in South Africa where they actually have to interact with these things. So what are we saying? And this is how complex it gets, because when I was doing a research, I noticed also that it's at levels where even governments want to censor this sort of content. So you'll remember last year in Kenya, there was a whole noise about banning of this cartoon on Nickelodeon called The Loud House. And this was because there was a feeling that the content was just too pornographic for that country's viewing. In Nigeria as well, Samira, and this is nothing personal, there was a series on Entertainment, I think it was called I Am Kate, and there was a whole lot of noise about pulling that down. And why? Because there were pro-gay connotations or depictions in that particular series. But I found the Ghanaians, are there any Ghanaians in the house? Yeah. The Ghanaians were really hilarious as well because you actually had the citizens themselves calling for a pull down of specific sexual content. So society as well. So you've got government on the other side, but you have society as well, speaking to cultural norms and what they believe, issues around morality and whether it's right or wrong not to be having specific content. The next thing I'm going to talk about is now, so are we saying that this has never always been the case? Where I come from in Zimbabwe, we saw a lot of people's images, intimate images, coming out as part of a political strategy to pull them down. So we had a very vocal pastor at some point. He's a Roman Catholic pastor called Pius Ncube. But this man was having a relationship with a woman in the congregation, and somehow they had cameras in his room. And then when he became really vocal and the ruling party had to deal with him, what is it that they sold? His intimate images. And it happened again with another politician. I think we have a very new popular, well, maybe not so popular, but this guy was in ZANU-PF, and he told he said, "Fuck you, Mr. President." And he became really vocal. And what happens next? His sex tape leaks as well. So what we should actually be talking about is, when is it right and when is it wrong? Because if you wake up one day and the national paper has some sexual content on, big banner that says, well, there's going to be some adult content, but hello, this is the front page of a national paper. Is it appropriate then, because it's being circulated to target a specific political activist? I'm not even going to get into how, when the last person I spoke about, his name is AC Lumumba, when his sex tape leaked, it was a political, ploy to bring him down, but there was a woman in that whole in the image, and it became all about this woman. Who is she? Why is she doing this? So there's a lot of there are issues around women and intimate images. So this was supposed to be about AC Lumumba, but it became about the woman. So what am I saying? I'm saying the internet has presented an alternative, yeah, but we also have to think about the realities of sexual minorities as well, in terms of access. Some friends of mine from the LGBTI community, when we had the feminist principles on the internet conversation in Harare, said they're more secure on Snapchat than they are on Facebook, for instance. And there's a lot of issues about, okay, fine, you have privacy issues, but am I always going to have protected and private content? What am I saying in terms of, I spoke earlier about sex education and the access our children have to DSTV, for instance. But what about within our own context? Are we having conversations around those diversities? And I like what the Coalition on African Lesbians did. They had this campaign which I followed, and it was on the South African Charter on Access to Health. So what we're saying is that we do have the internet, and it offers a platform for us to engage on issues related to our sexuality and health issues. I know, for instance, in Zimbabwe, it's very difficult for people from the LGBTI community to actually access health services. You're gonna have a sexually transmitted infection, but you can't even begin to think about those nurses, those horrible, bitter nurses are going to judge you or talk to you first about the fact that you're different. So it's a challenge. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is the major problem that we have is the existence of sexual offenses in censorship laws and the failure to define pornography. And to be honest, even within smaller nuclear settings like your family. I was sharing with some friends last night that my daughter turned 6, she turned 11, we bought her a mobile phone. 2 months later, we woke up, she was watching pornography. And this is just, she was watching pornography, but also I had to deal with my husband accepting that the sort of pornography she was watching was girl-on-girl pornography. So what do you begin to say to your children? You also have to deal with your husband. But this is a conversation and a reality that we live with every single day. So we need, technically, what we need to do is think about the laws that exist and think about realistically, because we in Zimbabwe just got what is the final draft of the cybercrimes law, and it has criminalized the distribution of intimate images without consent. But practically, is it going to work? And are the parameters, defined wide enough? Because let me give you an example. When you look at the domestic violence acts, that we have really good acts in the countries, but women are actually not able, back where I come from, to go into the police station, to the civil protection unit to say, victim-friendly unit to say, my husband's beating me up. They're going to remind her she doesn't work. And they're going to ask her, are you sure you want us to arrest this man? And this is the day-to-day realities in terms of implementation and what is realistic. And then also we need to accept that we have paradoxes around, cultural issues. And I think also the issue of religion. We have a booming, when I think about the number of churches that were there when I was 8, and the number of churches now, apostle this, prophet this, they have these huge youth women's meetings. What are they saying? What are they talking to each other about? Do we recognize specific rights to our sexuality? Abortion, for instance. You can't even have an open conversation about how many abortions you've had, So I just wanted to throw this as starting points, see what it is we can talk about, and begin to have a conversation of realistically, which direction are we going? Yes, we have the internet, but our reality is we have existing laws. And we are a people who come from communities who have social, religious, values. To what extent can I deal with the fact that I accidentally sent a message on the wrong group? And people are going to have perceptions about me based on my decision. Then the last thing I'm going to say is, the amount of body shaming that we are seeing on social media, we need to have a conversation about that. And I see that a lot of, it's always women shaming other women. She's too skinny, she's too fat, she's got, we need to also have a conversation about body shaming. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. My name is Felicia Antonio. I work with African Freedom of Expression Exchange. I'm the coordinator. AFEX is a network of free expression organizations based in Africa, and we currently have about 13 members. And MISA is one of AFEX members. Well, I'm not going to talk about sex. Okay, I'm going to talk about internet shutdowns. Yesterday, we had lengthy conversations around internet shutdowns. And the question I want to ask this morning is, do internet shutdowns really take away the passion with which citizens want to advocate for their own rights? And so I'll give instances where network shutdowns did not stop citizens. And when I say stop, they had an agenda and they went ahead to pursue this agenda despite network shutdowns. So we all remember the case of Egypt in 2011. There was a blackout, but then citizens came out in their numbers, protested, and in the end, the president had to step down. So even though the network was shut, the citizens' natural voices were louder and they got what it is they wanted. And then also, just to remind you about the Gambia in 2016, the internet was shut down before their elections. There was a crackdown on the media. But then one message the citizens had was clear: we need change. And then they got change. The dictator, Yahya Jammeh, left the country, and now the freedom of expression situation has really improved as compared to the past years. And then also, we all remember Cameroon. Cameroon shut down the internet for 93 days. But it puts a picture on the situation, or sort of the plight of the two Anglophone regions, the people in the two Anglophone regions. And the international community came together, campaigned against the network shutdown, and in the end, it was restored. But the question is, the government restored the internet following the pressures from various international organizations. But then it is yet to restore its dented reputation. We keep mentioning Cameroon in almost every case of network shutdowns. And then the economic ramifications, we can't even start counting it at this moment. And then in Togo, most recently, Togo joined countries that use internet shutdown to stifle free speech. Ahead of a protest, they shut down the internet. But thousands of these people, Togolese people, came out and went ahead to demonstrate. And in the end, one of the key demands of these protesters, that is to reintroduce a presidential term limit, has been put before Parliament, and hopefully something positive will come out of it. And then the last incident was in Mali. There was a Facebook disruption in Mali, also ahead of protests. It was also against, the protest was against constitutional reforms. And the citizens, it did not dissuade them. They came out in their numbers, protested, and currently the proposed reform has been shelved. So in all these instances, yes, network shutdowns are assault on freedom of expression and access to information. But then when the citizens are passionate about what they want, when citizens they know exactly what it is they are demanding for, not even network shutdowns can stop us. And so the point is, if network shutdowns are not stopping citizens, there's no need shutting the internet down, because when we look at the economic impact it has on countries that have shut down the internet, it's not worth it. And so I want to urge African governments to rather look at how to empower citizens using the internet. Invest in the ICT sector, invest in the internet sector so that people can have access to the internet, because the internet has come to stay, whether we like it or not. And then let's look at how to improve our lives with the benefits of the internet instead of shutting it down at the least provocation. And yes, so some members of AFEX, we've been working with other organizations here on internet shutdowns and digital rights advocacy. And I'll urge us all as civil society to continue fighting on, and I think the governments have started listening to us. The case of Ghana, the case of Kenya, they didn't shut down the internet during elections, and it didn't take away the peace or the national security that they normally use as an excuse to shut down the internet. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess the way this works is we're just going to have a conversation, I think, till about, I think it would be 10, because we started a little late. So if we can have a mic in the audience.
Hi, my name is Patricia from Uganda. First, on sex and sexuality online, it's so interesting that this conversation is happening now, because what's happening in my country is that we have the Anti-Pornography Act, and right now it's a bit of a circus, really, because now there's a commission that's has like 2 billion Ugandan shillings, and its aim is really just to try and stop people from, I don't know, watching porn, but they're going so far as even text messages. And I think one of the comments was, if you just looking at you can be seen as pornographic, and that's also illegal. And also it's interesting because the double standards with which these standards are applied are just really ridiculous. What happens, for example, is when somebody's pictures are leaked, yeah, then the response is different. Then everybody's saying, send me these pictures, let me see them. But then when somebody decides, consenting adults really just decide on how they want, their sexuality to be depicted or to be, it's then a different response. So I just really think that this conversation is extremely important. Yeah. And then secondly, on the internet shutdowns, I'd really like to agree with you, because also in my country, our internet was shut down twice last year. And I think what happens is that in the face of adversity, then resilience really grows, right? Because even those who were government leaning, when the internet was shut down, everybody was just like, this is no. And so there was more just outcry, I think, and there was more just resilience and saying, there's no way this is, why would you shut down the internet? And I think that, I wish our governments were a little bit wiser to realize that it only just makes them look worse. And so what's happening now is that there's moves to try and control and say this is safety, blah, blah, blah. But what that really means is that it's an additional infringement on people's rights and on what people can actually say. So it's just really interesting to just realize that our governments are very, very similar. And perhaps now what I'm asking is, what has worked that we can then adopt in other countries? What are the ways in which we can just continuously refuse and perhaps even just have conversations with government and say, listen, this is not working for you. Maybe let's do this. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think what we need to do as we engage is to see how wide the parameters of definition of pornography is within the law you're talking about. Because I think what remains unfortunate is that it's not clear. It really had to be clear when you say, okay, for instance, she looks like a porn star. Is it something she's wearing? Is it the way she's walking? What is it? So we can't have a net casting definition, number one. And then the unfortunate thing also within our African context is that there's always that morality context. And there's this fallacy around preserving our African culture and Africanness as if we don't get exposed to anything else. And yet it's also very clear that there's so much fluidity around people's values and morals every single day. So I think as we engage on issues relating to pornography, it should be clear what porn is in the first place. We can't just let it, be easily cast out and redefining itself based on a specific context when something specific is happening. So I think we have a challenge with our definitions on pornography in the majority of our African laws. Yeah.
Hi. Okay, regarding what worked, let me use Ghana, for instance. So ahead of the elections, the IGP announces that they might shut down the internet, specifically social media, on elections day, because people will use it to cause fear and panic. And civil society says no. Opposition says no. Why don't we look at how to use the internet to improve our election processes? So there were trainings for the security, media, citizens, CSOs on how we can use the internet to improve our electoral processes. And the pressure kept mounting till the point that the president had to assure everyone that they were not going to shut down social media on elections day. And then the IGP, he doesn't really understand how social media works. And that is always a problem. Most of them think it's social media, they will use it for whatever they want to do. But when you get them to understand, which is quite difficult, but it worked somehow for the Ghanaian society. And the Electoral Commission used social media to announce the electoral processes. There was a point the website of the Electoral Commission was hacked, and it was through social media they came to announce, condemned it, and said they will use another way of collating the results. And we can confidently say that it made really good impact in the electoral processes, which resulted in a credible and fair elections. So collaboration is important, and dialogue is also important.
Good morning. I'm Anais from Ecuador, and I find that this conversation about sexuality is late, and also I'm glad we can have this conversation because it's 21st century and we haven't spoke about this. So it's like something that really can surprise me at the same time that I'm not surprised. And I think sexuality is around everyday aspect, and we are not talking about that, even though we are seeing it every day. And I just want to say something about porn, and is that porn is the first way that our kids and people has sexual information, because parents are not talking about it. And they are not talking, schools are not talking about sexual education. So which is the porn that is getting, that kids are getting? Is porn that is, has rape on it, that is reproducing violence against women? It's not porn with concern, with consent. So that has to be a debate also, because it's not about saying there's has to be no porn. It's about which porn and which sexual education are we implementing and we are spreading around. And also, I just want to say that there are lots of safe platforms and ways to have safe nudes going around, but always there is a discrimination against women, because women's bodies are look like an object and not a subject. And we have to still have that conversation again. Even it's 21st century, I think, is not, we haven't passed that barrier of looking at women's body like an object at the same time that is happening with women's sexuality.
Thanks for that. So I'm liking the fact that these are not questions, because I don't know jack. No, but I'm happy that it's a conversation, and what I'm going to do is take down some notes and then probably share it in the blog I'll do after the forum, so we can have a sort of loose network around, you know, these conversations.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the presentations. My question goes to my big sister, Kwaliwe. In terms of legal recourse, is there any precedent on the continent for victims of revenge porn? Is there any country that's come up with some kind of a legal framework? Has anyone ever been actually tried, as far as we know? And then my second question is, would it be of any use to have policy or advocacy around repealing existing laws that criminalize the production of consensual sexual acts for personal use? So if my phone has got videos that I made with my partner, and this is criminal in certain contexts, is there any value in terms of seeking to repeal those laws?
Okay, as you're moving with the mic, I'm not really sure if there's been any successful cases, so if someone could share, that would be good. But I know that, for instance, in Zimbabwe, it would be very difficult for anybody to go and report, because there's also issues around you and production under the Censorship and Controls Act. So you're right to say we need to look at existing laws. That will make it difficult, because you become liable. You're the victim, but you're liable as well, because we have existing laws. And then in terms of what, your last question was what we can do with, sorry, I didn't get the last question. Okay, okay.
Hi, my name is Aisha Jiridi. I'm the National Coordinator of Axis North Africa. First, I would like to thank you about the talk about sex and sexuality. I like it very much. I have a remark and a question at the same time. So coming from a Muslim country that criminalizes same-sex marriage and refutes, of course, talks about LGBTI. And it is also the country, I may dare to say, that in which people enjoy a lot or all freedoms of expression, all type of freedom of expression brought by the Tunisian Revolution. So my question is, do you think that freedom can stand and have a role to play, freedom of expression, freedom of people to choose their, to have their choices? Can freedom really stand against laws and religion to protect these kind of persons or these, like these choices? Thank you.
You wanted to share an experience, so you can. Yeah, no, the thing is, I think one of the first few days I was here, one of the tweets that I got a couple of retweets around is, it's unfortunate that when people think about free expression, it's always been about speech. So now when you begin to say it's the circulation of my intimate image where I was expressing to this person how I feel visually with my body is a form of expression, they look at you like this crazy woman. So we need to redefine expression as well. It's not only about speech. The way you dress, when they say you look pornographic, that's a form of expression. The way you're going to pull up your hair, the way you're going to cut your hair, the way you're going to walk, it's a form of expression. So yes, we need to fight and redefine and qualify what expression you're talking about as an individual. So yes, free expression can hold. People just need to be firm around the issues.
I just wanted to say that actually there is a case in Kenya. I think that one of the victims of revenge porn was awarded a significant amount in damages. I just don't remember the case name, but there is a precedent, and I think that Kenya was among the first countries to actually follow through and hold like the perpetrator accountable. I think it was like a former beauty queen, and then her boyfriend leaked her pictures, and then court awarded her damages.
I think it will also be necessary to look, so in your cyber crimes laws, you're going to have the list of offenses. So this is where you're going to find revenge porn. But what you need to look at realistically is, in terms of implementation, do you have a cybersecurity committee or the committee or whatever has been set up to deal with the issue? Is it realistic? Are they prepared? So look, like when you look at the Zimbabwe Republic Police, I have a friend who stays in a neighborhood where a mobile phone was stolen, and somehow they checked it out and it was in her yard, right? And so the police who get there tell her, we've located a phone that was stolen, it's in your yard. And she's like, no, you need to look around because we don't have an extra cell phone. But her cousin had come visiting and he had 2 cell phones, and so they took him. They said, why do you have 2 cell phones? And it was like a whole week this guy had trouble with the cops. But my thing is, to what extent are the people who are supposed to be dealing with the issue able to deal with it? How do you pick who circulated your image, where it came from? Because I know a lot of leakages back in Zimbabwe come from the guys who fix phones. So you take your phone to someone to sort it out, and they take your data and then they circulate. And so my thing is, we also need to look at the offenses, the procedures, and start thinking about implementation for us to even start thinking about whether we are going to have a significant number of success stories as well.
Okay. Hi, my name is Carol. I'm from Tanzania. So this is more of a remark and perhaps maybe a request to get views from other people and hear other people's experience. So we would like to think of ourselves, Tanzania that is, as a conservative nation. We do pride ourselves in upholding the morals and traditions that have been imposed upon us by our forefathers and foremothers. But with internet freedom now, and going back to your example, because we were just discussing with my colleague here, I have a 9-year-old daughter, and I can only imagine if I ever do come across a situation like yours, I don't think I would know what to do, honestly. Thankfully, I don't have a husband, so I wouldn't have to answer to him. But now, going back to, I would like to know, how do you address the standards set by your society, okay? And then your own morality or your own standards for morality and internet freedom. I found out from my colleague here who is also very much into internet freedom. He says that it's actually possible in Tanzania to block porn sites. But then even if you block porn sites, you have these ladies, and I'm sure Irene has been speaking about it for the past 2 days, that have taken this freedom of expression to a whole new level. And I was just Googling pornography right now. It says anything that is intended to sexually arouse you. Now, I don't know how many people on Instagram and how many people, like when you go on your news feed, you come across these, I call them Instagram vixens, actually. They're almost naked. But then how, as a society, as Africa, because I do believe that we do share very common customs and traditions and values, how do you protect your society from that? And at the same time, advocate for internet freedom, and at the same time uphold and exercise your faith or your moral values or your standards?
Thanks, that's a really difficult question. And I'm hoping somebody else is going to help. But I spoke about issues of definitions, and I'm happy you raised it. We need to be clear what pornography is. You can't say anything in a definition, because then that gives somebody else the responsibility of choosing or deciding whether the way I am dressed is going to sexually arouse you. How the hell am I supposed to know? It's not about you, it's about me. And then so I think with religion and with culture, it's also very difficult because it assumes that we are in this vacuum, and then we are in an echo chamber. The conversations we have are about us. Nobody else influences the way we think. So we can't continue to talk about preserving our Africanness. And this is where my argument is, because you're going to send your daughter to university in Europe, and she's going to come back home at some point, but she's not going to come back the same. But that doesn't take away the fact that she's your daughter. So can we also think about whether we can really preserve Africanness? Because I think it's a fallacy. I don't think it's possible. Yeah. So I think we're going to take three more and then just close. Yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Good morning. My name is Asha. Well, I'm interested to say something on sex and sexuality. I read a report which I cannot cite, unfortunately, I don't remember. I thought it's very important for the information to be used here. So far, when we come to internet usage, the number of women or girls who access the internet are fewer compared to men, not even half of their number on the internet. But still yet, with the research, it has shown that the women who use internet have a lot of quality content compared to the content which men produce on the internet. So you find that it is more, women using internet is more effective, and women, whatever they use the internet for, it's usually for something productive, effective, or something which would produce something ultimately, compared to how men use the internet. As in numbers. I'm sorry, but Google is there. I believe that when you Google somebody, you get that information. Now, getting back to the point, when we talk about sex and sexuality, you've already pointed out here, it's really hard to measure or to point out what is sexuality or how it should be described or anything. I think that there is a trend sometimes of some group, maybe led by men, who wants to define what women are doing on the internet. They want to define how, you know, when you're not clear of the impact of or the effects of how the women are using the internet, you may get an impression that the women are useless on the internet. I just want to make that clear, that a lot of content which is there held by women is positive. And when it comes to sex and sexuality, the way a woman is modeled, when she's naked or maybe half naked or whatever, she should be attractive. So when she is attractive compared to a male, of course. I'm just saying, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, in looks. Yeah, I wish I was in front here and Google up pictures of a woman and a man. You know, as a woman, I would look first at the woman and then go to the man and see, yeah, you're making that point. What I would like to say is that When we look at sex and sexuality, we must not get under the misinterpretation of what is being defined as sexuality and what is being defined as sex when it comes to internet usage. I would like to direct something to Felicia when she was saying something about digital freedom of expression issues in Africa. I just have a quick question. As in, Felicia, do you see it improving? Do you see digital freedom improving? As in, do you think maybe in the next 5 years we will be better off or maybe worse off? I would just like your opinion. Thank you.
I am an optimist, so I would say yes, because there are instances where a government threatens to shut down the internet, and then people go like, why do you want to shut it down? And I'll still use Ghana as an example. And they are listening. The IGP made a comment during his threat that they will shut it down as Uganda did. But then they made him understand, you don't just shut it down for no reason. So I think some of the governments are beginning to listen to us. Some will not outrightly shut it down, but they are somehow trying to monitor our activities on the internet by using these numerous laws, anti-pornographic laws, cybersecurity, and all that. But I think the situation will improve. It will come to a point, governments have to admit that the internet has come to stay, and then tend to be friendly towards it. I'm an optimist, and that is what I think. Yes.
So we'll take the last and then just close. We've been given a, yeah. So, yeah, thanks.
I'll be extraordinarily brief. I just wanted to point out that Human Rights Watch has a 2013 report called Improving Police Response to Sexual Assault. Obviously, this goes way beyond sexual assault and purely police response. But there are partners who are already doing work in this field and can provide training, and some of that material can be adapted beyond sexual assault to some of the less defined issues. So I just wanted to point that out in terms of practical steps and creating model laws and model training for police academies. I know South Africa has its own police academies, and many countries across the continent do as well. Some of those do work with multilateral partners.
We don't have much time. We have to close the session. So sorry you weren't able to ask all your questions or make any comments. Thank you very much for your time and your contributions. And let's meet at the next session. Thank you.